We're going to talk now to Christopher Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, because several MPs, opposition mostly, have signed a letter which they've sent to the Financial Times in which they basically said that they want some kind of universal income support to be brought in after the lockdown is lifted, because everybody should be given some kind of basic income as we try to recover economically from whatever the damage is after however many weeks of lockdown. Christopher, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I'm never in favour of universal basic income plans because it seems to me that you end up giving money to people that don't need it.
Yes, indeed. That is one of the problems. Most people don't need it.
Right.
We do already have a safety net, universal credit and other benefits. I mean, there are several problems with basic income. The principle of it, I have to say, is actually quite nice. And Milton Friedman, the great liberal economist, was a supporter of a similar scheme,
right.
Technically a reverse income tax. But the idea is, or should be, that if you give everybody a basic income, you massively simplify government and the benefit system in particular. But what you need to then do is you need to withdraw all other benefits and all other benefits in kind. So if you give somebody a certain amount of money, you then don't need the state to provide education or health or any other benefits, or pensions, indeed, for that matter. So you save a huge amount of money on one side, but you are paying out a huge amount of money, which, as you rightly say, a lot of it goes to people who don't need it. And, of course, it's got to be clawed back. So you're giving people an income. How are you paying for it? Well, you're taxing people's income.
Right.
So there's a circularity to it to some extent. But it actually does make sense. It does simplify things enormously, and it then gives people the freedom to choose health providers, to choose their schools, to choose their own pension and so on. However, that is not what the MPs who are calling for this today, or most of the campaigners who want a basic income, are after. They want to add it on top of all the benefits and benefits in kind, thereby increasing the expense of it for one thing, and not getting rid of any of the complexity or inefficiency that is the whole point of having a basic income in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that the difficulty for the government now is because they've managed to find all sorts of ways of getting money free to people throughout this virus pandemic as it's going on. They'll find it tough to be able to turn around to anyone and say, well, we can't afford that, because people will say, well, let's just borrow some more then.
Well, possibly, but if people saw the kind of sums that would be involved in giving everybody a basic income, I don't know what kind of figure these MPs have in mind, but it would have to be a fair bit. So I mean, the basic problem is it's unaffordable if you add it on top of all the other forms of government spending. Either you get rid of huge tranches of government spending, slim down state, and then give people a basic income but have a higher tax rates when people are earning money, or you don't bother.
Right. And what about where it's been tried before? Didn't they try this in Finland a little while ago?
Yeah, they've tried it in a few places, and it's never been terribly successful. Right. The main reason being that it does provide a disincentive to work, which is fairly unsurprising, I think, to most people.
Yes.
But if you give people money for nothing and say they can do nothing, some people will just do nothing.
Yes, well, I've heard that argument made about people who've been furloughed, that, they might get so used to being paid 80% of their salary for doing nothing at all that they might not fancy going back to work.
Well, they wouldn't do if the furloughing continues indefinitely. Yeah, right. Why would you? But, of course, it's not going to continue indefinitely. Whereas this basic income plan, although it's been started as an emergency measure to tackle coronavirus, it's been coordinated by a group that wants to have a basic income permanently.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting, isn't it? And as far as the money goes at the moment, how do you see it panning out? Because obviously the big questions now that are being asked, as we appear to have gone through a peak, we think, whether there's a second one or not, we don't know. But, how much longer do you see the government going before they start to sort of slightly relax things?
Well, I would think that their 3-week extension announced last week will be the end of it. I'd be surprised if they push it on any more than that, unless there is a very unexpected spike in numbers, because 6 weeks is about as much as the economy can withstand. I think a 6-week lockdown is going to be very serious, very damaging, but much more than that would be catastrophic. And I also think a second lockdown, should that come later in the year, would be catastrophic. 6 weeks we can just about handle. It's still very, very bad, but it is not quite the end of the world.
It's not fatal, I suppose, is the phrase you would use, right?
Yeah, we're just racking up a lot of money. There will be some businesses go bust, but hopefully not too many. I think the chancellor's scheme has been pretty good actually in covering most people, but of course there are bound to be some people will suffer. But if this carries on for much longer than that, the economic damage will be really disastrous. Plus, I just don't think people are going to obey it much longer. We've got some really nice weather at the moment, and certainly more to come. And you can only really police this by consent. If people see the numbers going down to sort of dozens of cases a day as opposed to hundreds, then I think people will just ignore the law ultimately.
Well, certainly I saw stories this morning already that Sunday was one of the busiest travelling days for cars since this all began. And certainly there is some evidence in London, I don't know what it's like where you are, that there's quite a lot of vehicles out there on the street, more than there were, say, a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that's right. I went into town. I lived on the south coast. There were more people sort of milling around yesterday than I'd seen for quite some time, and it's perfectly understandable. Particularly for the millions of people who don't have a garden or much green space. I don't think as a country we can withstand a great deal more of this. The public have been very supportive of the lockdown so far. They understand what's at stake, but if they feel that the peak is very clearly past, and the figures do suggest that, then I think in a couple of weeks' time, people will feel it's time to start the economy going again and get back to work.
Yes, and I think the government is going to have to be part of that whole mix, isn't it? They're going to have to look as if they've got a plan. I can understand why they're not releasing any plans at the moment because, those kind of hostile daily briefings that they're giving out where all they seem to be asked is the same question over and over again every day by the same people. I can perfectly well understand why they're not going to do that. But at some point, they're going to have to give a bit of kind of comfort and succour to the populace, aren't they?
Yeah, they will. I dare say they will. I think they're quite right not to provide a plan yet because this is a rapidly evolving situation. We've got the benefit that we can look at places like Germany and Austria, which are starting to open things up again, and we can learn best practice. So it's very likely, I think, that they will open the primary schools first, for example. But if they say that and then find actually that's not the best thing to do, you'll have all the media and the opposition saying, "Oh, it's a U-turn, the government's in shambles," and all this kind of Westminster tittle-tattle nonsense.
Right.
So they've got plenty of time to think about it. I don't think there's anything many people can really do with that information if they were given it now anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think the media reached sort of peak idiocy when the Sunday Times said that, they were critical of the government for following the scientific advice. I thought to myself, well, what would they have said if they hadn't followed the scientific advice?
Indeed, yeah, it is a bit strange. Yeah, I think this has been a bad time for many political journalists. They're looking at stories which aren't there. Yeah. There really isn't very much news. The only thing that really happens every day is we get a daily briefing and the latest figures.
Yeah, and also I thought despite the fact that Matt Hancock's always being sort of critiqued as having had a bad performance and looking terrible and all the rest of it, when he said yesterday, look, one of the reasons that we don't answer firms who are trying to sell us PPE is because many of them, we've checked them out, and they've just started their business like the day before, and they're kind of like the Del Boy type businesses who are going, oh look, we've just come across a load of PPE, do you fancy a big bucket load of it on the sly? Well, why would you buy from them?
Well, that's quite true, I'm sure. However, I mean, it has been shown that there have been some perfectly reputable companies trying to help, and Public Health England have taken a very centralised, we know best approach.
Yes.
And
that's also true.
Ignored them.
That's also true. And I think also the NHS has shown itself to have quite a few shortcomings because it's so big and so unwieldy and so sort of locked up in red tape that it's a very unagile organisation.
Yes, and one of the things that have changed over the last few weeks is that the NHS has essentially abandoned a lot of that red tape in order to get things done. And you have to say it has been able to get things done at a remarkable speed, particularly the NHS large-scale hospitals.
Which are now being criticised. Which are now being criticised for not being full.
Well, exactly, and you can't win. And if you bought a huge amount of PPE and there hadn't been a pandemic, then people would be complaining about the waste there. There are obviously, in any future inquiry is obviously going to find that mistakes were made with 20/20 hindsight. I think we can see some mistakes have been made without hindsight. But I think that's probably a conversation for another day, really.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. Christopher, stay well. Thank you very much indeed. Christopher Snowdon there from the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. We've got a lot more to do. We want